It is the 31st century, and mankind is once again at war.
Mankind is at war? No way. After Activision lost the rights to the Battletech franchise, the MechWarrior series lay dormant for almost 3 years between the release of MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries and MechWarrior 3. Even without the rights to MechWarrior, Activision kept making mech games, with 1997's Heavy Gear, built on a modified Mech 2 engine. While not a bad game, it entirely missed the point of the Heavy Gear license and played just like Mech 2. Hey, you could do worse. If MechWarrior 2 had a long and troubled development, MechWarrior 3 was a comedy of errors. In the 90s, there was a 3D Battletech arcade game made by Virtual Worlds. The game cabinets were called Tesla pods and were styled like mech cockpits. I never played these, but I did play a game called Kido Senshi Gandamu Senjou no Kizuna while I was living in Japan in college. I racked up 62 kills on my Gundam pilot's license while I was there. Even for a simple game, it was awesome, and I can only imagine the Tesla pods were seriously fun. FASA wanted to use the game engine from the Tesla pods as a basis for MechWarrior 3, so they created a division of their company called FASA Interactive Technologies, or FIT, to develop the game. MicroProse, who also worked with FASA on the spin-off Mech Commander, would publish. And then the collective shit hit the proverbial fan. FIT got behind schedule with modifying the game engine from the Battletech pods, and MicroProse collapsed. HoloByte, the company that owned MicroProse, basically fired all of the MicroProse employees and renamed itself MicroProse. Evidently, that didn't save them, and they got purchased by Hasbro Interactive, the video games branch of the Hasbro toy company. Then, FASA Interactive merged with the developers of the Battletech pods. The project was still bottoming out, so Hasbro brought in Zipper Interactive, late of the SOCOM franchise, to just finish the damn thing already. Zipper almost completely redid the game with their own engine, possibly the same one in their tank combat game Recoil. Only the 3D models were reused from the Battletech pods. The work-in-progress version of MechWarrior 3 was put on the back burner and is actually what later became MechWarrior 4. Before MechWarrior 3 was released in 1999, Microsoft purchased FASA Interactive. Evidence of the intellectual property hot potato is seen in MechWarrior 3's title cards, listing FASA Interactive, Zipper Interactive, Hasbro Interactive, MicroProse, and Microsoft. With a production history that troubled, you'd expect MechWarrior 3 to be a bit of a disaster, but somehow it just isn't. MechWarrior 3 is glorious. MechWarrior 3 takes place after the events of the MechWarrior 2 trilogy and tells the story of Operation Bulldog, a campaign undertaken by the Innersphere to kick some clan holdouts out of Innersphere space. The assault goes all Market Garden, and you're trapped on the planet with no backup. Your lance mates are scattered around, and Clan Smoke Jaguar may be weakened, but they're still a clan. Mech 3 looks and plays like a refinement of MechWarrior 2. The controls and playstyle are mostly the same as the older games. You can move your mech's arms independent of torso twist in Mech 3, which allows for more precision aiming, and extra functions are added to lance-mate commands and your radar. Mech 3 also added the ability to flush your mech's coolant in order to eliminate a lot of waste heat in a hurry, something which has become something of a Mech series mainstay. The game's compressed production schedule is noticeable in the menus. They're purely serviceable and have no personality, especially compared to the beautifully detailed renders in 2 parts of the Mech 2 trilogy. The customization menu is similarly rough-looking and clumsy and annoying to mess with. In-game Mech 3 looks a lot better. The detail all goes into the mech, so the terrain can be a bit bland, but really the focus should be on the mechs because, I don't know, the game is called MechWarrior, not Scenery Warrior. Mechs show bullet holes when hit with ballistic weapons. They get charred black by lasers, and you can see wires and twisted metal left behind when limbs are blown off. Taking cockpit damage causes cracks to appear in the cockpit glass, explosive weapons cause craters that you can take cover in, and machine guns create showers of sparks. They're all neat effects, and MechWarrior 3 looks awesome and gets the feel of mechs right. They're heavy, but they move more smoothly than in MechWarrior 2, and they don't look like they're ice skating anymore. Zipper added mech footprints, as if to point out that the walking animations match up perfectly with the speed the mechs are moving. Point taken, Zipper, it looks awesome. The new mouse control system for aiming of weapons is a good touch, and hitting targets at long range is challenging. The ability to achieve fine targeting with the mouse makes the game feel more in-depth. You can really pick your opponent apart, and using the targeting computer is a sweet addition. Sadly, you really need it, as the view distance seems to top out at around 800 meters. With the greater precision and options for long-range combat, it sucks that the draw distance isn't much improved over Mech 2. The default control scheme is too slow and too sloppy to be any good with the increased difficulty, so you'll have to rebind them, and the number of controls means that it's hard to get a system that works without sacrificing functionality. Trying to manage arm control and torso control is very difficult. I found a WASD layout that works pretty well. This also makes it very difficult to set up a joystick, because there simply aren't enough buttons and you'll be completely hamstrung by the clumsiness of a stick. The late 90s were the heyday of the 3D accelerator graphics card, and Mech 3 did its best to finish what Mech 2 started. The game is highly scalable though, and it will run without a 3D accelerator. I captured some of the footage for this video on my Windows 95 computer, which is built on a Slot 1 Pentium 2 with a Matrox Mystique 220 and an 8MB Diamond Monster 3DFX Voodoo 2. Running with the Mystique 220, it chugged dick harder than Johnny Oldschool, which is not surprising. With the Voodoo 2 and the settings cranked up, it runs well enough, but with a bit of chop. When I was a kid, I played most games like this, because my only gaming systems were a non-gaming family computer and an N64. I got the majority of my capture with an Athlon 900 box running Windows 98 and using a GeForce 4. That one is way overkill for the game, but it does produce a higher resolution and looks a lot smoother. The new cockpit view is less distinct than in MechWarrior 2, but it feels more like a cockpit and less like a glass dome. MechWarrior 2 went for a sort of virtual cockpit made up of your multi-function displays. You could toggle these to different modes. Some were useful, like a rear-view camera for watching your back, or the downward camera for lining up a death from above maneuver. Some were at least fun, like the missile camera that could even be toggled to full screen for scouting out areas ahead of you, or just enjoying the rush of following a missile from launch to impact. Mercenaries added some totally non-useful displays too, for what I'm pretty sure is no reason at all. Ah, extra throttle display. I needed that. Oh boy, now I can look at the targeted object on two sides of the screen instead of just one. MechWarrior 3 keeps the two MFDs, but they can only show the basic skeletal wireframe damage model or the HTAL display. The other option is a 3D render of your own mech with enhanced color to show damage. The only other real problem is that the cockpit view is now a mix of HUD and diegetic interface. Your useful readouts are overlaid right in front of the camera, but the mech still has plenty of screens inside. I can't help but wonder why there are so many screens if everything useful just gets projected onto your retinas through the neuro helmet. What do all these screens do? Like that one, what's all this green shit for? Science? Is that my Winamp visualizer? Am I looking at bars and waves here? Screensavers? What are these? Is that Task Manager? Other mech games have done a better job with their heads-up displays. In Earthsiege, the same HUD elements are reconfigured to fit perfectly into mechs with different cockpit layouts, which makes the mech designs feel very cohesive but unique. It's like how the instrument cluster is laid out in a car. You have to have a speedometer, but it can go on the left or the right, or if you're in a Mini, in the center console. In Genome, another 90s mech game, the weapon and damage displays are built into the cockpit. The HUD elements are clearly defined, so you'll always know what you're looking at, but it's different enough that it still feels like a new vehicle. MechWarrior 3 has a linear set of missions, and you get predetermined salvage. It's a shame the dynamic salvage from the patched version of MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries was never used again in the entire series. I'm not kidding. Mech 3 would gain much-needed replay value from dynamic salvage. As you progress through the story, you reunite with the rest of your Lance and hack your way deeper into Smoke Jaguar-held territory. The missions are more slow-paced than other mech games. You almost never do any protecting and have a lot of time to plan your approach on different objectives. The enemy variety is pretty good and gives Mech 3 that combined arms feel I love so much. Between turrets, tanks, and other stuff, fighting takes some strategy, and you do have to coordinate your 3-person Lance and your MFB, which is a convoy of repair and refit vehicles you can move around the map to service your mechs. It feels very methodical, which you might like or hate depending on your style. Using the map version of the radar, you can order teammates to different places on the map and give them attack, defend, and repair orders. Given the open nature and size of the maps, you can experiment with some cool tactics, like splitting your group to defend objectives or deal with multiple objectives at a time. This is the only mech title to have more sophisticated electronics packages to customize mechs with. If you want to, you can set up one of your lance mates as a scout using a C3 slave and a Beagle active probe to increase their radar range and send them out to get map information. It's this kind of optional tactical depth that makes the missions in Mech 3 so interesting. You can also make your own craters for cover, and standing in water cools you down faster, so your interaction with the environment is more hands-on than in previous mech games. Over the course of the campaign, you reunite with your missing squad mates until you have a full lance. The mobile field-based guy has no name, and none of them have faces, but they're all still great, simple characters. MFB Dude, I guess that's what we'll call him, lent his awesome voice to another game around this time, Falcon 4.0, also published by the MicroProse Hasbro tag team. My guess is Hasbro Interactive had to call in some in-house talent to finish MechWarrior 3 on time. It's also possible they just used the same group of actors for all their games, since Michael Mancuso, voice of MFB Dude, is also listed for Star Trek Generations and Star Trek Final Unity, both MicroProse games in addition to Falcon 4.0. None of this really matters, I just think it's interesting when game characters are voiced by really talented people who seem to immediately disappear after that. In Mech 2, Carol Rugier delivered the lines with an admirable, almost frightening enthusiasm. MechWarrior 3's resident bitching Betty is uncredited. I can't find a listing for anything other than the core cast. Whoever she is, she sounds like she's in a hurry.
Reactor online, sensors online, weapons online, all systems nominal.
Mech 2's music tracks are still fondly remembered, and probably on a lot of iPods out there. Mech 3, not so much. You get less than 10 minutes of music put together as one track with several movements that you hear on every mission. It feels rushed, which makes sense. Voices, cutscenes, and music are probably all added near the end of development, and with the development and release of MechWarrior 3 being so troubled, those things probably drew the short straw. The cutscenes especially are abstract and simple, but they do an adequate job of telling the story. The intro cutscene is still as badass as ever, and like in Mech 2 Mercenaries, it has main characters and story elements right in it. The sense of scale is masterful. It's so cool to see helpless infantry running from a massive clan mech, or to see the tables turned when the Timberwolf gets its metal ass handed to it by Dominic Payne in an Atlas. It has a happy ending though. I'm not sure if that's supposed to happen in MechWarrior intros. Mech 3 has an internal economy like MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries. All mech games after Mercenaries did this, and it's a great way to get the player invested in the story. Mech 3 doesn't have money or a shop, but your mech and items are persistent across missions. This can make the game very hard, because if you lose a chassis, you have to wait until the next one is given to you. No dynamic salvage and no market means you can get screwed in the late game if you don't have enough mechs or don't have the ammo to load your weapons. The mech selection is reduced a bit from Mercenaries. The Atlas, for example, shows up only in the intro, during which it gets destroyed, and you don't salvage one over the course of the game. The loss of their one Atlas is even referenced in a bit of dialogue, which is a nice continuity joke. The smallish mech selection isn't really a bad thing, because there's still a mix of clan and inner-sphere types represented and some new designs not seen in previous games. More importantly, they don't double down on too many mechs of the same tonnage. Here's the thing, a lot of MechWarrior fans call Mech 3 the last true mech game because MechWarrior 4 completely revamped the customization aspect and fiddled with the gameplay. I disagree. I've mentioned this problem before, but the customization is too open. It's based on the tabletop game, so each mech body part has a number of open criticals which can be filled with any item. These criticals are the same for every mech, despite the design of different mechs being wildly different, not to mention the size. That means you can put the same weapons in the tiny vestigial arm of the 40-ton Strider as you can in the massive cannon arm of the Orion. And if you don't want to have missiles in your missile rack, you can just cram machine guns and lasers in there. On the one hand, it's nice to have freedom, but restricting what parts can go where on a chassis gives the mech design so much more character, and forces you to be creative. And what did mech fans do with that freedom? Remove all the weapons and armor from the arms. Put weapons only in the torsos. Put lasers in the legs. Remove all the armor from the rear to save weight, etc., etc. Every custom mech design turned into a nightmare of min-maxing that totally annihilates the appeal of the game. You don't have that problem in the tabletop game as much because players are invested in the realism of the world and are trying to roleplay. Mech 3 still has the same old problems. If you have two 60-ton mechs, how do you choose between them? You go by the hitbox. Is it short? Are the legs hard to shoot off? That's it. It's all numbers and transparent mechanics. A mech is just X tons of free space to mold into whatever you feel like at the time, which for most gamers is LRMs and pulse lasers. It's not a huge problem here because the mech selection is very clean without a lot of overlap, unlike in Mech 2 Mercenaries where there were way too many mechs. Still, there is nothing as obnoxious as seeing pulse lasers shooting out of an enemy mech's knees, and customized mech designs are, ironically, the reason why I think MechWarrior multiplayer modes have always kinda sucked. I never got the chance to play them online when they were in full swing, aside from MechWarrior Online, so maybe the scale of the matches really made up for it, or maybe every server restricted players to stock mechs. MechWarrior 3 additionally has the problem of allowing you to lock on targets through terrain and lob flights of LRMs over hills. No points for guessing what weapon most players prefer. The new targeting computer and hit-scan laser weapons don't see as much use as they should thanks to the snub-nosed draw distance that means most combat is outside visual range anyway. MechWarrior 4's hardpoint system was a huge improvement. It makes the mech designs feel purposeful, especially since they all have some story behind them if you read the literature. If a mech was designed to have a large, powerful laser in one hand, you can't just yank it out and put a missile rack in there, because you don't have, say, an ammo feed system in place. You can't put lasers in your legs because you don't have power couplings going into the legs, because that would be stupid. How would you aim a weapon that was bobbing around on your kneecap? Mech designs would have more weapons on the arms, where they would be more versatile and capable of aiming, and because there would need to be room in the torso for the engine. This also makes Omni-Mechs so much more interesting. Omni slots in Mech 4 allow any weapon to be placed in them, which makes a chassis more flexible and makes it seem more technologically advanced, like Clan Mechs and later Inner-Sphere designs should feel. Basically, the hardpoint system improves A, gameplay by keeping the min-maxing at bay and forcing players to use more of the weapon selection, and B, game feel by making mechs seem like war machines with a purpose and a design goal, instead of a huge gun bucket on legs you can stuff full of whatever. I like being able to customize my mechs this way. I just like the hardpoint system even more. I'm not going to summarize the story, but the game builds nicely in the usual MechWarrior crescendo. Hard missions, full lance, lots of heavy mechs, it just plain works. It doesn't overstay its welcome. So let's talk about the box. MechWarrior 3 is the most beautifully packaged PC game I've ever seen, aside from Daikatana, obviously. The big box is gorgeously printed, and the title and mech on the front are embossed. The front flap lifts up to reveal a summoner towering over you. It's incredible. The background graphics are mostly from the intro cutscene, and all of the screenshots are perfectly chosen. Tiny little squares of impeccably rendered mech action. I wanted this game more than anything from the day I saw it in the store. In hindsight, it's not really out of the ordinary for old PC game boxes. Inside the box, we find a set of promotional flyers for every company involved in the game. MechWarrior 2 is compatible with the Microsoft Sidewinder 3D Pro joystick, and Mech 3 is compatible with the newer version that added vibration. I've never used one of these, and I'm not sure if I'd like a force feedback joystick. I'll have to try one someday. The game is still compatible with the original Sidewinder 3D Pro, which is a great joystick, and the one I played Mech 2 on for the first time ever at a neighbor's house. Another flyer is for Battletech Ralpartha miniatures, something else which I always wanted, but luckily I've had the willpower to avoid actually buying. There's a tiny 2-page edition of Computer Gaming World magazine. Oh wait, that's just a postcard folded in half. Lastly, there's a catalog of other contemporaneous MicroProse games, like Falcon 4.0, which I don't have. I've got Falcon 3 though. Mech Commander, and MechWarrior 3. Hey, I already have this game. There's a decent manual with lots of pictures and cool information. It's all blue though, which makes the pictures look like crap. There's a quick reference card explaining controls like the ones that came with Mech 2 and Mercs, and a reference manual showing specs for mech chassis. This one is in color and is way nicer than the manual. MechWarrior 3 is harder to find than MechWarrior 2, but you can still get a nice boxed copy if you're prepared to spend a little bit of money. The box is a stone cold stunner, and you should definitely get the game with box if you can. The gold version of the game comes with Mech 3 and the expansion, and is literally impossible to get. Compared to Mech 2, it's easy to get your hands on the good version of MechWarrior 3, because there's only one version. That'll save time. The compatibility issue is less encouraging. MechWarrior 3 is a tough game to get running correctly. In Windows XP, it was unstable and buggy even in compatibility mode. In 64-bit Windows 7, the game will install and run, but poorly. Mech 3 is in that weird liminal region between old stuff you can run in DOSBox and newer stuff you can run natively in modern Windows. It's the only MechWarrior game you can't use on the same machine you're watching this video on, which I assume is either a newish computer or a phone. Should you track it down anyway? MechWarrior 3 always feels like the forgotten mech game, remembered by die-hard fans as the last true mech sim. I may disagree on that last point, but I still think not enough people have played Mech 3. MechWarrior 3 went head-to-head with Activision's mech game Heavy Gear 2 and came out on top in sales and reception. Also out at the time was Earthsiege, and all 3 games were well received. It was definitely a good time to be a mech fan. An expansion pack to MechWarrior 3 titled Pirate's Moon was released the same year, and we'll talk all about that next time. Thanks for watching. See you real soon. Reactor online, sensors online, weapons online, all systems nominal. There we go, that's a wrap.